Welcome to the Giro d'Italia. I'm out in Turin ahead of the race in search of the latest bikes and tech, but I'm also on a mission to investigate if the world's best riders are still using super low and aggressive riding positions, because I'm starting to see some riders opting for a higher position with more spaces underneath their step. Is this because they want more comfort, or is there a new way of thinking for bike position and aerodynamics? So let me tell you about my theory here, because it's important to understand what's going on first. So aerodynamic drag is the largest factor affecting the speed that the riders can cycle at, unless of course they're cycling up a big hill. And generally speaking, a lower front end of the bike is great because it helps lower the rider's torso and back, which is good for aerodynamics. However, using a super low position means that the rider's arms are stretched out, which is bad for aerodynamics because most of the arm is then presented to the wind. Now, my theory here is that if the handlebars are raised and you try to keep the rider's torso in the same position, there's only one option, and that is that they have to bend their elbows. So by bending the elbow as the handlebars come up, the forearm then sits horizontally, which means there's less of it presented to the wind, which is good for aerodynamics and is going to help the riders ride faster for less effort. With any luck, that all makes total sense to you. So let's go check out the bikes. First, I headed to the team of Bahrain Victorious to see what their setup was like. Slammed stem, slammed stem, slammed stem, slammed stem. So it would appear that the setups here are as low as the bike's geometry will allow, most of the riders choosing to have just the initial headset bearing cover and nothing else. But this is just one team and a handful of riders. So what do some of the other team bikes look like? The Jayco Allure bikes look like this. The EF Education bikes look like this. Astana Kazakhstan like this. Alpecin Deceuninck like this. And the Ineos team bikes look like this. Quite a mix here, and whilst some bike setups support my theory, low positions do still seem common. But what about Tadej Pogačar, one of the fastest riders in the world and at the time of recording, the leader of this year's Giro d'Italia? This is an interesting case because his position is understandably very good and will be the result of many aero testing sessions. But how does he have his bars set up? Well, the answer is with very small spacers and very narrow handlebars, but still high enough that when he's in full attack mode, his elbows are bent and his forearms are almost parallel to the ground. If we look back at his late attack on stage 3, you can see how this position was utilised to almost hold off a peloton at full speed. The position clearly helping here, along with a huge wattage bazooka. This style of position is not exclusive to Pogačar though, and it's used extensively by the whole peloton when the speeds are high and when the riders are in the breakaway group. It's often referred to as the Aerohoods Position. The rider's back is relatively flat and the forearms close to parallel with the road. We've also tested this ourselves in the wind tunnel, and in some cases the watt savings at race speeds are significant. If the bars were to be positioned lower though, one of two crucial position changes would occur. The hip and back angle would be more extreme, closing up the hip angle, which is generally considered to have a negative impact on the power output. Or the rider would have to straighten their arms to keep the hip angle the same, which in turn places more of the arm exposed to the wind, adding drag and making them slower. These are subtle changes, but at the top of the sport, they're very important. This image of Cian Uijtdebroeks shows how a lower hand position should not always be considered to be faster or more aerodynamic. While his back is low and fairly flat, the whole of his arm is presented to the wind. This will create more aerodynamic drag compared to if his body position remained the same, but his arms were bent. If we take a closer look at other riders outside of the Giro, such as Mathieu van der Poel or Wout van Aert, we can see similarities in that same position too. So I think it's fair to say riders are not all running stacks and stacks of spacers underneath their stems in order to get their positions higher. But the days of seeing aggressive negative angled stems are long gone, and it's now a rarity to see rather than commonplace. The same can be said for time trial positions too. Go back 10 years or more and the riders' arms were positioned as low as possible, with large open spaces between their heads and their arms, almost acting like a wind scoop, which we now know is slow. The modern position brings the bars much higher, closing the gap between the arms and the head. Remco Evenepoel makes great use of this, as does our very own time trial specialist, Oliver Bridgewood. So it appears some riders are starting to use more spacers underneath their stems to help bring their positions ever so slightly higher, perhaps in line with my theory. But it does remain that the vast majority of bikes that I've seen are still using a super low and aggressive slammed position, which kind of goes against my theory. I don't think this is because I'm completely wrong, but I've got an additional bit to add into my theory. Now, it would appear that bikes from, say, 10, 20 years ago, clearly bike geometry has evolved since then. So now I think we're starting to see bike positions that are using a longer and taller head tube anyway. So even though the rider's bike position is coming up ever so slightly, they're still not needing to use many spacers underneath their stem. Now this is a theory, of course. I don't know whether this is 100% accurate, but it is something I'm going to continue to investigate as this year's race season evolves, and perhaps we can make a video on in the future. Okay, let me know your thoughts on my theory in the comment section down below, and you can also let me know your thoughts on pros bike setups in general. And if you want to support what we do, subscribe to GCN and GCN Tech. Right, I'm out of here. See you later.